Hello, this is JB. I live in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'm originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, and today I'm going to talk about the company that my grandfather, the late Billy James Brown, started way back in the early 1950s, somewhere around 1952 to 55. Um, he started a company that was known as B.J. Brown Tile and Marble Company, and like the name implies, uh, he installed tile and marble in houses and in uh, different types of commercial properties, but mostly residential. He um, he was born in the early 1930s during the time of the Great Depression. His dad was a sign painter, and he dropped out of high school, but I think during after that he went to some place called the Burton Institute, which I guess was for some sort of adult studies. He never mentioned having a GED, so I don't know if it was for that or not, or if they even had GEDs back then. But then he went to the Coast Guard for a short time, a year and something, where he was on the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Taney, and then out in the Pacific, it was a weather ship in the Northern Pacific, mostly I think, between California and Alaska. And then after that, he came back home. He worked for a tree company where his brother-in-law also worked. Brother-in-law, his name was Gil Davis. And then at some point, they all, or they both, got into the tile business. It's not exactly clear to me when that was, but it was sometime between 1952 and 1954. Um, and I think it was Gil uh, got into the business first, and then he taught my grandfather how to do it, and then my grandfather started his own company because he was independent that way. I think he did best when he was working on his own. He liked to make his own rules. He lived his whole life that way. He kind of did things his own way. Um, but he started this company, and this was back when Charlotte was a very small city. Now it's larger city. It's got around 600, 700,000 people in the city proper, and then in the county, maybe a million. In the metropolitan area, maybe around 3 million. So it's much larger now. But back in those times, put he installed tile in all sorts of houses, from lower end houses, which back then people in lower end houses had tile work. Um, Surprisingly, now probably not so much. Now they have vinyl or um, other artificial fake coverings like linoleum or plastic wood. But they had tile. So he mostly worked in uh, South Charlotte, where there were some older neighborhoods like Dilworth and Myers Park, in Eastover, which is kind of part of Myers Park, but different areas like that. And then in North Charlotte, uh, there were a bunch of middle class or lower middle class houses that they put tile in, and they mostly worked in that area. But as the years went on, they started to expand as the city expanded. So they worked in all around the city, um, and then in surrounding suburbs, um, like Lake Norman, um, all the towns in there, Huntersville, Davidson, Mooresville, um, starting in after Lake Norman was built in the early '60s, I believe, um, into the '80s, '90s. Um, they started working in those homes, and then South Charlotte, um, in the areas like Pineville, um, in the areas between Pineville and Matthews. There was a lot of growth there in areas like Piper Glen, Valentine. Providence Road, Providence Country Club, and a lot of different neighborhoods. Can't think of all of them. And then to the southwest of Charlotte, there's Lake Wiley, which is also a man-made lake. There was a lot of neighborhoods in there that they started to work out. And at one point, my grandfather had an office at Lake Wiley for no particular reason other than he just wanted to have an office at Lake Wiley. But for the most part, starting very early, even in this, made this shirt from a newspaper advertisement. It says B.J. Brown Tile and Marble, Style with Tile, 1832 Birchcrest Drive. Birchcrest Drive is in East Charlotte off of Central Avenue. I used to live in that area. And it was a middle class neighborhood. But he used to work out of his house, and then he moved a couple different times. But the place that I know about best was off of Wyandotte Avenue, which was near 7th Street, near downtown Charlotte. And in that house, which he lived at for most of his adult life, had a basement, and that was basically his headquarters. So he had like a lot of tile that was stored there, tools, equipment, and like below the deck, they used to have like their trash pile. So after they would tear out a job, or finish installing a job, and they had all sorts of trash or scrap, they would throw it under the deck until they took it to the dump. But then they also had a sand pile in the backyard that they kept, and whenever they had a job where they needed sand for mortar, um, either for fat mud, because they used to mud walls before they put tile on them, so they would mix sand and cement and water, and then turn it into this very hard material after they scratched it onto the wall and then smoothed it out on the wall. But they used laths in those days. But they would use the sand for that. There was a story of a family member who worked for my uncle at one point, or my grandfather at one point, but he was drunk, and he went down to the sand pile for some reason, and he started shoveling sand into the back of his car. And nobody quite knows why, but he must have had quite a few. And everybody always thought that was funny. But there's a picture of my dad when he was young in the 70s, probably late 70s, 78, where my dad was down there by the trash pile with the dump truck. But my uncle, who's my dad's older brother, starting sometime in the early 1970s, I'm guessing around 1972, he dropped out. Well, he was going to Myers Park High School in Charlotte, and that was at a very tense time. And my uncle got into lots of physical altercations, and he was generally a person at that age who followed his own rules. And the principal encouraged him to leave and never come back, and he didn't. He, I think, eventually may have gotten a GED, but he went to work starting in the early 70s until when he died in 2014, so maybe about 42 years or so. But he, in the 1970s, after he got good at tile, he started doing a lot of the jobs. And my dad, when my dad graduated from high school, and even when he was in high school, starting maybe 76, my dad worked full time, and he, they together did a lot of the jobs. And my grandfather, who had been in the industry at that point around 25 years, started to step away from the work. He was still the owner of the company and still the boss, but other people were doing the work, including guys that worked for my grandfather. Some older men who had worked with my grandfather for many years. Um, One of them, his name was Bobby Black, and he was a friend of mine because I knew him ever since I was little. But there was another one named William. But them and my dad, they and my uncle did a lot of the work, and there was probably other people whose names I don't remember right now. But they did a lot of the work, and my uncle started to take more control of the company. He was more knowledgeable about what was going on with the finances, and he kind of kept my dad out of it. But my grandfather ended up being very hands off because he had a lot of hobbies. He loved flying airplanes. He loved buying and selling and fixing up cars. He loved riding horses. He had some horses at a stable near Mint Hill. He bought land and tried to develop it and did develop it. He would buy land and develop it and then sell it. And he just did other things. Uh, he he bought a piece of land in the North Carolina mountains near Linville, and he built a cabin on that land in the 80s. And so he was gone a lot of the time. And my uncle ran a lot of the things because he was older than my dad, and his personality was more controlling. And so he started to control a lot of that. And he eventually ended up taking over the company. And I'll talk about my uncle and his company more in another video. But my grandfather, I have only, I have very few, well, I have photos of him, but very few photos of the tile business. I have memories of seeing like the tile in the basement and in this back shed he used to have, and grout and different tools and stuff. But just not many pictures, at least that I have. And but I do have this one photo of sometime in the early 1950s or late 1950s when my aunt, my favorite aunt, Aunt Sherry, she was a little girl and she was with some other little girl, and I'm not sure who it was, maybe a cousin. And my grandmother was on the front sidewalk, and it was a looks like a '58 Chevrolet car on one side of the photo, and on the other side is a '58 Chevrolet Apache truck. And on the side it said B.J. Brown Tile and Marble Company, Charlotte, North Carolina, and that was on the door. And then on the back quarter panel at the top it said "Style of Tile," which is the same as on here. So that was his tagline for many years, and he liked that. He told me that tagline when I was a kid, and I had always remembered it being tile was style, but it actually, or tile was style, but it was actually style with tile. I think tile with style is better because tile is what he did, and he did it with style instead of style being what he does, and he does it with tile. But if I had been around and I had been advising him, I would have told him to switch it around because it just works better. But that was his tagline, and he liked it, and it was good, and it helped people understand what it was he was doing, and it got attention, I think. But he was a um, he was a decent businessman. He didn't have a lot of education, so he didn't know a whole lot about business. He learned, I think, a lot about business by making mistakes. I'm not going to go into the mistakes that he made, but he made some mistakes, none bad, none that would have gotten him in any real trouble. Um, but he made some mistakes, and he had times that were like lean times. I remember my uncle told me that his dad, my grandfather, used to tell him, "I'll put you out in the fields," uh, talking about how they didn't have money, and my grandfather needed a way to make money, so he said he would put the kids to work. It was a joke. He didn't actually have to do that, but there were lean times. I think early on, like in the '60s, mostly in certain parts of the '70s, because the '70s were tough economically because of the price of gasoline and inflation. Um, but he did okay, and he had a lot of different builders that he worked for. He was a subcontractor, so he worked with a lot of different builders. Some of them I knew, like there was a man named Browning who we used to take when I was a kid. We would take Christmas basket, like fruit baskets, then to him. He was in his later years, and he was living in this luxury high-rise apartment building. But there were a lot of different ones all around the Charlotte area, and back then it was much smaller. Charlotte was, and so he was well known at that time for his work, uh, and he did all kind of work. He even one time was contracted by the United States Navy to put tile at a Navy base in the Bahamas, and I did find newspaper articles about this base being built, and it was in the 1960s. And he and two guys who worked for him, African American males, they went down there, and they had to go through Atlanta, Georgia airport, Atlanta Hartsfield airport to get there. And when they were going through Atlanta, he said someone at the airport said they can't fly because it was during the time when there was segregation. And he said, yes, they can. My grandfather said, yes, they can. And the guy apparently said, no, they can't. And he said, they're going with me. And they did. They all went to the Bahamas together. But he, my grandfather respected those men because they were hard workers. And they were with him for a long time, and they respected him. And they worked well together, but you know, they just didn't make a lot of money because that's just the way it was back then. Not it wasn't right, but that's just the way it was. And but you know, they were always still nice to me, and my dad, as far as I know, I always got along with them, and my uncle did too. I remember when I was 20 some years ago, they would come see my uncle. Even when they were in their older age, they would come see my uncle and stuff. They had always been friendly to my uncle his whole life, and so they had jokes, and some of them are kind of rough, even for YouTube. So I'm not going to repeat them, but they said things that were inappropriate but funny, and but you know, they just had a long term relationship. But I remember when I was a kid, my uh, my dad used to take me over because my dad needed a break. He would take me over to my grandfather's house. First, it was weekends, and then it was like weeks at a time during the summer. And me and my grandfather, we built a really good relationship. He was at that point my best friend in the world, including my friends like in the neighborhood and at school and all this. He he wasn't always very good with his family when he was younger, and when he was raising his family, but because he was always preoccupied doing other things. But with me, he spent time with me, and he did things with me, and he taught me things, and we were like buddies. We were friends, even though he was old, in the late '60s, and I was young, in the single digits and early teens. He would call me like his riding partner because he liked cowboy movies, and cowboy movies you have a riding partner because you're riding horses together. But he and we would like ride in the truck, and we would go pick up tile from different places. We would drop off materials at different jobs. When my uncle was running the company, we would go to different tile distributors to pick up tile and stone and granite, marble, and take them to different places. And a a lot of times in the morning we would go to different jobs around the Charlotte area, and we would he was like the estimator, so he would draw the job and like where the tile was going to be, and how much we would need and how much it would cost, and I would hold the tape measure for him uh, so that he could get a good measurement, and sometimes we would do the math together because uh, I was pretty. I mean, I wasn't great at math, but I was pretty quick, especially basic math, addition, subtraction, and multiplication. But so we would do the math, and I would just help him do different things. And I remember at his cabin when he sold it in 1999, uh, early 1999, I think. Yeah. Um, Me and my dad, right before that, we went up there and helped him. We put tile in the tub. It was a tile tub, which you don't see very often. There was already tile there, but we put tile over top of tile. And so I remember that. And then me and my dad and my grandfather would put tile in the kitchen floor of his home on Wyandotte. We put um, brick pavers on the front walkway of that home. We put tile in the. They used to have this closet. They turned into a uh, bathroom because my grandmother worked in the afternoons, and she would take these 4 hour showers. I don't know what she was doing in there for 4 hours, but she would take like 4 hour showers. Like, I don't know. But so he was getting older in age, and when you're older, your bladder doesn't hold for quite as long, so he would need to go to the bathroom, and we would have to go down to the basement and use the bathroom, urinate in coffee cans and stuff. And finally, he said, "No, I have to have a bathroom." So we turned the closet into a bathroom. It just had a toilet in there, nothing else. But put the tile in there, and he had tile in his kitchen that he installed, but it was this brown tile, and had different sizes of tile, and they were all pieced together. But it was never grouted, even though like we were a tile family and everybody knows how to grout. It was never grouted. Nobody quite knew why, but it was also always a nice backdrop for all of our family gatherings. And in the kitchen, he had, or in the living room, um, there was a stairway. Was actually in the kitchen, but a stairway that went down to the basement, and they got rid of that and turned the stairway into a closet, and put a fireplace behind where the closet was. Cause like, there was a stairway, and they just put a floor there, put a closet, and then they put a fireplace. And my dad and my grandfather and my brother or my uncle, from what I understand, built this fireplace, and it was a stone fireplace, and it was very beautiful, very very nice, nice and hard too. I remember everybody used to, a lot of the guys used to sit on it when we had Christmas or other gatherings, and there was a mantle, and it had, I don't remember the fireplace ever being used, but the mantle had all the family photos on there, and we it was just a nice backdrop for our thing. But that house was sold in 2024, no, 2023, like the fall of 2023. And when it was sold, I went there one last time, and I went down to the um, under the deck where the trash pile used to be, and I gathered up a few shards of old tile. Some of it, and I showed it on here before on a different video, but old tile like that was obviously from 50s or 60s because of the way it was made. It was different than the way they make tile now. But I gathered a few of those pieces just for me to keep, um, and so I'll have those. But that's really all I have. Oh, one other thing I do have is that in the cabin that he had near Linville, um, there were these tile floors, and he used these 12 by 12 very thick brown Mexican tiles. I forget what they're called, terracotta, but it was a beautiful color, and he had a thick cement, think cement, grout joints. And I actually talked to someone on Facebook who helped him with that. It was a lady and her husband who, are now her husband, but they helped, along with a bunch of other people, they helped build the cabin in the 80s. And she talked about doing that, and that when they were done with the job, there was some left over, and he gave it to her for free, and she put it in her first house, and so that was a special memory for them. And but like as long as I can remember, I've been around tile because my dad was in tile, and some of my first memories were in his tile truck, and but around my grandfather, I was always around it, and so it's been a big part of my life. And I was involved for a couple of years, full time in the tile industry, and so that had some good memories for me. But my grandfather started it all. Started it way back, like I said, early 1950s, sometime between 1952 and 1955. But the my dad continues in the industry now. My uncle is no longer living, died in 2014, and I have a couple cousins that are still in the industry in the Charlotte area. And but I don't know exactly, other than what I said. Gil Davis was also in tile, but I don't know how he decided that he was going to be in the tile industry and how he knew that he should stay in it. He, like I said, had some times where, we call it lean times, where he wasn't making a whole lot of money, didn't have a lot of jobs. There was, early on, he used to buy tile from this place called Renpro Distributing, Renpro Tile. It's still there under a different name, Harkey Tile now, but off of Sunnyside Avenue in East Charlotte, off of Central Avenue. And the man who owned that place originally, who started it, his name was Jack Renfro, and he told my grandfather that he had to buy tile through the back door. He would sell it to him through the back door. And my grandfather said, "If you're not going to sell it to me to the front door, you're not going to sell it to me." And then the man relented and sold it to my grandfather. But there were some other tile installers who were trying to keep my grandfather out of the business. My grandfather wasn't having that, and so he kept going. But he my grandfather didn't make tons of money, but he did really well. He beat expectations for the other for that his dad had set, because his dad was from a different time, and he went through the 30s. And so my grandfather, growing up, didn't have much money, but he did really well, and he was able to achieve his dreams, which was to have something. He had a family, he had a house, he had property, he had all kind of different cars that he liked. He liked cars a lot, liked fixing them. He had that cabin, and he was able to fly airplanes. He had, since he was a kid, he grew up in that time where the aviation industry was really taking off, pun intended, and he was fascinated by airplanes, and he was able to own at least one, and he rented others frequently, but he was able to fly, which he really enjoyed, because I think it gave him independence. When you're up there in an airplane, um, you know, the only rules are created by physics, by your skill, by I guess federal aviation laws, but you can pretty much do whatever you want as long as your skill set will and your aircraft. I mean, your aircraft creates limitations too, because if you're trying to do something your aircraft won't do, you're going to have a problem. But it gives you a lot of freedom to go where you want, do what you want to do, um, and just fly. And so he did that because he did he did well in the industry. I'm very proud of my grandfather, of my uncle and my dad, myself, and my brother, who was in the industry, my cousins, because we've kept something going for now, going on 75 years. And that's something to be proud of. But it all started with my grandfather, Bill Brown. And so, thanks for listening. Have a good day.